Joining us in the studio this morning is he at one time served as the chairman statewide of the Idaho Republican Party, and now he is one of the four candidates who is running for lieutenant governor on the Republican ticket. Primary now is, well, it's only 10 months away, getting closer and closer. Steve Yates is in the studio with us this morning. First of all, welcome.
Thank you so much, Bill. Great to be with you.
I know you've been on the program before, but I couldn't recall if you've been in the studio or not.
I have been in the studio before. It's a memorable experience. It has left a deep and lasting impression upon me.
This is going to be an interesting election year. Name recognition wise, at least within Republican ranks, you're well known because of your work with the party. But you've got two legislators and a third who was in the legislature who are going up against you, and some of them, three of you, are from Eastern Idaho.
Mhm.
So you're slicing this pie up in a great many different ways.
Well, I look at 2018 as a major hinge election. We've got an open seat for governor, an open seat for lieutenant governor, an open congressional seat. And it's for the first time in a long time that we have really a chance for Idahoans to pause and ask,
Mhm.
what direction do we really want our state to go? We've got a new administration in Washington, whatever anyone wants to think about what's happening in Washington. And from a distance, there's not a lot to like, but there's a lot of deregulation that's going on that I think that's significant. And that, I think, is the key point. We have a federal government whose leader no longer wakes up every day thinking about how to step on states' rights and overregulate our lives. That doesn't solve all of our problems, but now the burden is somewhat on us. What are we prepared to do here in Idaho? I think that's just a tremendous opportunity. My most exciting experience in politics was observing somewhat what reform minded governors were
Mhm.
doing in the United States in the late 80s, early 90s. And that was really the preparatory field for what happened with the Republican Revolution in Congress and then leading into the Bush administration. A lot was accomplished, but not enough, perhaps, for a lot of us. But that kind of laboratory of reform and demonstrating results in the states with the federal government leaving some room for experiments in the states. I think we're on the cusp of that. And that's why I want to bring my experience in business and public service to the office of lieutenant governor.
When talking about your background, you did a job of stitching the party back together and at least keeping a lid on some of those differences that
Mhm.
had torn it apart a few years ago here in the state. Uh, Looking at that, if you come in to office as lieutenant governor, are you going to be a conciliator, conciliatory voice, or are you going to be somewhat of a rabble rouser making a lot of noise? Not easy to do from the seat of lieutenant governor, but you
Right.
still have some sort of a bully pulpit.
Well, the lieutenant governor is elected to a separate constitutional office from the governor and any other statewide office holder. You do have to campaign for and receive somewhat of a mandate from voters. I believe that by going to voters and getting a mandate for strong conservative policy solutions, which has been my entire career, and also promoting the idea of we need to focus on mission and results. I believe in being moved by my heart, but verified by my head. And so my core values are what drive me in life. They're conservative values, pro life, pro gun, pro freedom, pro enterprise, things that are very familiar to long term conservative movement participants. But we also have to respect market forces. We have members of the legislature that receive a mandate from the voters of their own. We'll have other elected officials that receive theirs. Politics is about pushing ideas, pushing your values, and measuring what level of support you have in your coalition and getting to that vote. I mean, the deep dissatisfaction and frustration we have with the United States Senate right now is a function of that reality of people who are elected from Maine that have a completely different mandate than someone voted from Idaho, and yet they're in the same party. And within our own state, I think we're in a better position, but we still have to run those numbers. Get the mandate from the people, push forward good ideas, measure results, and be business minded about it. And that's what I try to do in the party. I think that kind of thinking should apply to what we do in state government in many ways. And I also want the state government to be cooperative with the party and stay close to its constituents and grassroots.
We've got about a minute before the break. Website that you've got set up now for people if they'd like to check it out and learn more about you.
Thank you. It's yatesforidaho.com, Yates, F-O-R, Idaho.com. There's an introductory video there and a few issues briefs.
We have more coming up with the candidate in just a few minutes. And I also wanted to mention Weather is not going to be quite as steamy as it was. Well, it wasn't steamy so much as it was like a convection oven, but you still may be having issues with your air conditioning. And I'd like to recommend Ramsey Heating and Electric in Burley. The team at Ramsey's, if you've got some issues, will come out and they'll get the job done right. They'll get it done right the first time. Problem free, cozy summers are found at Ramsey Heating and Electric, 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley. Telephone number 678 0459. That's 678 0459. Ramsey Heating and Electric, where they sell warm winters and cool summers. We've got more coming up with Steve Yates. Again, he's the former chairman of the Idaho Republican Party, now running as a candidate for lieutenant governor. That's on the way in just a few minutes. Also, it's 76 at 940. Bill Colley with you, too, as well on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Well, see, it's not even political season, and we were just listening to a commercial for Tommy Alquist. It's 9:43 right now, 77. Our guest in the studio, Steve Yates. He is the former chairman of the Idaho Republican Party and now a candidate for lieutenant governor as a Republican, as if we needed to explain that. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story this morning. Hey, speaking of that, just off the sidetrack here, we heard the commercial for Tommy Alquist's campaign. We're down to the three candidates running for governor now. Uh, Michelle Stennett was on this program last week, and even though she's a Democrat, a caller asked her of those three because it's likely going to be a Republican who wins the general election. At least the demographics is still on that side at this point for who knows, maybe a very long period of time. Who she would like to work with of those three, and it surprised me because she didn't say, well, as a Democrat. She actually threw out a name and said that she worked with Brad a little in the legislature, feels that they would get along fine if he happened to be the next governor. Having worked with all of these people as state chairman, do you have a preference among the three that would be easiest to work with for you if you're a lieutenant governor?
Well, actually, I can see opportunities and challenges with all three, and I see mostly opportunity. I have some strong views about what I think would be interesting policy issues that a lieutenant governor could champion. I don't think that any of the three candidates would object to someone who's had a lot of his life spent in international trade and national security taking a leading role on behalf of the new governor and the new administration on interaction with and promotion of Idaho issues with the Idaho National Laboratory and the equities that are there. I've had a lot of work in the past on cybersecurity and counterproliferation, and the lab actually has people that are world class experts, and there are important things to be done there. I don't think that any of the candidates would have an objection with my being a promoter of building out the missions of Mountain Home and Gowan Air and other places where we have foreign military partners doing their training here and bringing jobs and opportunity to our economy. And so I think there's some wide areas there where it doesn't matter so much. My experience is different enough that it would complement rather than present a challenge. I think that each of these three men that are now the contenders for governor, they bring different things to the office, and I respect that it's up to the voters to choose which direction they want to go. And I like the idea of having business experience apply to government. But the little family has been in business for a long time. Tommy Alquist has been in business. I like some of the values and principles that Raul Labrador emphasizes, and I think so. I think that there's opportunity no matter which way the voters go. I have said repeatedly because this question comes up a lot when traveling around the state. Are you going to endorse or do you have a preference? And I say, honestly, as chairman, I got used to the idea of we focus on our mission and we'll follow the will of the voters. And I still feel that way about these races. But I'd say selfishly, none of these three men are going to do anything to help me get elected lieutenant governor. And so I'm not going to worry as much about trying to plow the field for them as I need to plow the field for getting the strongest possible mandate for the roles and missions that I think I could deliver as lieutenant governor.
One of those primary opponents you have, I was having lunch one day at the Kelt Pub in Idaho Falls, and she made it clear that there is a candidate she would back over the others. And then he dropped out to run for Labrador's congressional seat, and now
Mhm.
I believe she's backing Raul. So candidates themselves make individual decisions. You're not all thinking alike on this.
Correct. And the fact of the matter is, I doubt very much that the candidate that she prefers is spending a moment of any day trying to help someone else win the seat. Each of these candidates for governor is and should be spending every ounce of their effort and focus on their race. It is, I think, the most important decision for Idaho voters in 2018. Who the new governor is going to set the tone and direction for our state for 4 to 8 years and maybe even longer, as we've learned. And so I think that's consequential. And I also think it's really incumbent upon us as candidates and the voters that we engage to think about this not as a popularity contest, because I think that politics is bigger than the name on the ballot. What are the qualifications people bring to the job? What are the things that voters think need to be done? Do they think that having a strong connection with the grassroots and an advocate inside state government is important? Well, then, who's been active in the grassroots for the last few years? Do they think it's important for someone who can promote trade and investment for Idaho? We have a tremendous number of industries, companies, and even families in Idaho who rely on relationships beyond the United States to finance, manufacture, and sell what they produce to grow Idaho's economy. And if we don't have a growing economy, we can't provide the job opportunities for our kids coming out of the education chute. So we've got to focus on what are the skills we want there to enhance the ability of the next governor of Idaho to lead the state, and together, hopefully, hold the Republican majority together to focus on getting things done.
I want to point out we're at 9:48, and our guest in the studio is Steve Yates. He is a candidate for lieutenant governor on the Republican side. He'll be campaigning in a primary coming up in May of next year. We're at 77. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And if you'd like to actually meet and speak to the candidate today, in about 15 minutes, he's going to be driving over to the County West building, and you're going to be having a meet and greet there live. So people just after 10 o'clock, if they've got the time, they can drop by and see you.
They're definitely welcome.
We wanted to point out your background. Number one, you're fluent in Mandarin, which,
Just like everyone in Idaho.
just like everyone in Idaho, that's the most commonly spoken language in the world.
Yes,
And you've got that background. You worked for Vice President Cheney at
correct.
one point as an advisor
Hmm.
on national security issues,
Right.
and then you came to Idaho for business reasons.
Hmm.
And so you've been working here a number of years on that. Do all of these? There's a mosaic in every candidate's background,
Hmm.
and you mentioned that you would be a good business liaison, and obviously. The one thing Butch Otter has done is built up a strong relationship with the Chinese when it comes to business. Are you the person that picks up that mantle as lieutenant governor and can run with that?
It's certainly a part of my experience. I mean, one of the first things I did in government, well, number one, I was a missionary in Taiwan in my earlier years, and I was a failure at learning Spanish, which I'm ashamed to admit, but I couldn't assign gender to inanimate objects.
Ditto.
For reasons I can't explain, Chinese was relatively easier for me to learn. And when I came home and I was giving a report in church, there was a very fine gentleman in the audience that came up afterwards and said, "I've never seen a white guy speak Chinese the way you do. How would you like to get paid while you go to school?" And I said, "That sounds like an excellent idea." And I became an intelligence officer, and I became an intelligence liaison officer for the United States Department of Commerce, helping the secretary and others prepare for presidential business development missions. And so, very, very early in my life, I became familiar with what top national, multinational companies were doing to engage major trade partners. And a lot of that is done in a microcosm in the States. And so there certainly would be relevant experience and background to help carry that kind of mission forward. But for me, my dominant formative experience was growing up in the suburbs of a town of 300 people. The neighbors in my little neck of the woods were mechanics, plumbers, teachers, pastors, repairmen, and farmers. And my dad was a car mechanic. He worked every day in a shop, would come home and work every night and every Saturday in a garage by our home. And he just taught me a tremendous amount by example of service, integrity, and basically putting the priorities of others above self. And that is just what has animated me. The work, hard work of ordinary Americans getting by raising families is what animates me, what makes me feel passionate about making sure that government policy, first and foremost, does no harm and stays out of the way of ordinary, everyday Americans as they try to make a living.
Our guest is Steve Yates, and we have a telephone call. Caller looking to chat with the candidate. You're on the air on KLIX at 9:52. Go ahead.
Good morning. I haven't been able to hear most of your conversation, but I've heard part of it. I just wanted to get his view on NAFTA. Um, it was passed that it was going to be such a great boon, and actually hasn't been too bad for agriculture. But we have a trade deficit with almost zero with Canada and Mexico before NAFTA, and Trump was absolutely correct in renegotiating it because our trade deficit, I think, right now runs annually about 150 billion between the two countries. I've got a friend in Canada just laughs at it, says, "Who's doing your negotiations on trade?" Because we're getting the short end of the stick, losing a lot of factories and lots of jobs have been going south and north.
Well,
So,
Steve,
what's your take on the NAFTA thing and the fact that it needs to be renegotiated, and some of these other trade agreements that are hurting our sugar industry now, the free trade area of the Americas, is definitely hurting our sugar industry. So I'd like his comments. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. Canada and Mexico are two of the most important trade relationships for Idaho, not just the United States. And of course, running for lieutenant governor, it wouldn't necessarily be a policy position to set national policy with regard to international trade agreements. As just to share how I think about this, I don't believe in any policy being permanently good. And I think that, whatever the merits of NAFTA were at the time, it's now almost a full generation behind us. And I don't think it's good to have any policy stay in place uncritically without measuring the business results. I strongly suspect that if we did a thorough review of NAFTA, we would find some good things and some bad things. And over time, the job of government should be weeding the garden and going through and continuing the things that are good, but fixing the things or eliminating the things that were bad. And so I strongly support this idea of constant minding and tending of things. So the idea of renegotiating these things is attractive to me. But I would be an Idaho first kind of person when it comes to promoting trade and investment relationships. I would want to review what our agreements and relationships are between Idaho business and agriculture leaders with regard to Canada and Mexico, and make sure that it's really benefiting us as much as it possibly can. We're a great partner to a lot of different people around the world, and I want to make sure that it's good for Idaho.
I want to thank you for the call. We've got about 2 minutes left. Very quickly, you had referenced how education opened up doors for you, but you also mentioned jobs that people used to have that we always called blue collar.
Yeah.
I read the other day where Idahoans strongly favor better education in the trades.
Yep.
That is going to be a critical issue for anybody in state government to address in coming years.
It's a major passion of mine, and over the course of the campaign, I'd give more details than a few minutes here can possibly allow. But needless to say, I am not a believer that there's a one size fits all approach to education. I'm a firm believer in lifelong learning. I don't believe that anyone at the age of 18 or 22 or 25 can possibly know what they will retire from at some point in life. And I don't believe that any employer can possibly, with credibility, tell someone, I'm hiring you out of college, and 25 or 30 years down the road, you have guaranteed retirement from this company. I've lived through enough change in my life. I know that it took me 7 years to get through a bachelor's degree program with years off with work and other kinds of twists and turns. And yet, I seem to end up with an advanced degree from a university everyone would know about. I did not end up being employed in the area I was educated in over the course of my career. We need flexibility. I think that the trades and vocational training are vital to what we do. Number one, it matches the job opportunities that are presented in our state that can make good money and sustain families. That's vital. But I also think that culturally it would be important for us to define success not just by being a doctor and a lawyer, which can be fine and are necessary in our society, but success can come in many flavors. I graduated from university with a degree in Chinese language. Who'd have thunk anyone could ever get employed with that? If I had, instead of a foreign language requirement, an apprenticeship as a requirement for an undergraduate degree in liberal arts, well, then I could either save money as a low paid person coming out of college, or if I hit a bump in the road, I've got a skill where I can go get employed instead of first going to unemployment insurance and other kind of welfare programs. I just think we need to have well-rounded people. The trades are laudable, I think, professions that we should hold in higher esteem. And part of that comes from the bias of the oldest son of a car mechanic who grew up with a permanent smell of a shop and grease under his fingernails. And I love that man. He's my hero. And he raised five rambunctious kids who've gone on, and some of them have done great things, and some of them have just done okay. And we love each other, and that is the definition of success.
Before we wrap up, web contact information again for the campaign.
Thank you. It's yatesforidaho.com. It's Yates, F-O-R, Idaho.com. And on social media, it's at Yates, the number 4, Idaho. And please join us and watch the introductory video, send feedback, and look forward to engaging people over the many months of this primary.
We got to point out Steve is on his way to County West. In just a few minutes, he's going to be doing a public meet and greet there. And so we want to let him go. Also, we've got to wrap up for the day. Rush Limbaugh's program is coming up next in just a few minutes following Fox News at 10 o'clock. Tomorrow morning, Dan Tom from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department is going to join us in studio. In fact, we're going to try and hold Dan over tomorrow to talk a little bit more expansively about some of the issues we touched on last week about driving safety, but also road rage. And God willing, the creek don't rise, I'll be back here tomorrow morning between 8 and 10 o'clock on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.